When you first open up Genesis chapter 10, it looks like just a long, kind of dusty list of names, right? But what if I told you it's something way more interesting? The source material we're looking at today presents this as an ancient world map. Not a map of mountains and rivers, but a map of people, a bold attempt to chart the entire known world from a single starting point. I mean, think about it. If your whole worldview is that everyone came from one family, how do you explain the incredible variety of languages, cultures, and nations you see all around you? It's a really deep question about who we are and where we all come from. Well, this chapter is basically their answer. It's often called the Table of Nations, and it's this really systematic attempt to give every group of people a specific place in one big, unified family story. And that whole story kicks off with three brothers.
The framework is actually pretty simple, but it's also really elegant. After the Great Flood, humanity gets a total reset, a fresh start, from just one family, Noah and his three sons. So according to the text, every single nation on Earth branches out from one of these three guys.
So first up, we have Japheth. His descendants are described as the maritime peoples. Think of them as the seafarers, the ones who spread out all along the coastlands and islands. Geographically, this points to the peoples north and west of Israel, across the Mediterranean.
Then you've got Ham. His descendants are generally linked with the territories to the south. This branch is a big one. It includes the peoples of Egypt, parts of Africa, and, this is super important for where the story goes next, the inhabitants of Canaan.
And that brings us to the third son, Shem. His descendants are the Semitic peoples, right there in the Near East. And this is the lineage that the rest of Genesis is going to zoom in on. The story of Abraham and everything that follows is going to come directly from this branch of the family tree.
But then, right in the middle of this super orderly map, the narrator just slams on the brakes. We get this sudden, really detailed close-up on one guy from the line of Ham who completely disrupts the flow. A man named Nimrod.
The text gives us this little insight, quoting what was clearly a common saying back in the day, that someone is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter. This tells you he wasn't just some guy, he was a legend. His name was shorthand for incredible power and dominance.
And the text builds this whole profile for him. He's the first heroic warrior, a mighty conqueror. We're not talking about a local chieftain here. This is the world's first empire builder. He establishes a whole kingdom in Babylonia, with famous cities like Babel, and then pushes his power north into Assyria, building the great city of Nineveh. He's this centralizing force of human power.
And this is where you see the core conflict laid bare. Right after the flood, the divine command was to spread out, to be fruitful and fill the earth. But what's Nimrod's project? The exact opposite. Gather people together, build huge cities, and consolidate all the power in one place. It's a total clash of visions for humanity's future.
So in this interpretation, Nimrod isn't just a king. He's the archetype of the rebel, the first tyrant. He represents this path of human ambition that stands in direct opposition to the divine plan. And this sets up a major theme for the rest of the Bible, this ongoing conflict between rebellious empires like Babel and Assyria, and the faithful family of Abraham, who will eventually be called to leave that very part of the world.
Okay, so beyond the family tree and the epic story of Nimrod, the source points out that there's another layer here, something kind of hidden in the structure of the chapter. It's a numerical code that unlocks a much deeper meaning. It suggests the author wasn't just making a list, they were crafting a message.
And that number is 70. Now why 70? This isn't just a random number. It seems totally deliberate, and it carries this massive symbolic weight throughout the rest of the Bible.
So here's how you get there. It's pretty incredible. If you actually count up the names of the descendants listed as the founders of nations in this chapter, and you exclude the rebellious outlier Nimrod, you get exactly 70. You have 14 from Japheth's line, 30 from Ham's, and 26 from Shem's. It all adds up perfectly to 70 nations.
So what's the big deal? Well, the source suggests this beautiful numerology is at play. The number 7 in the Bible often represents divine completeness, like the 7 days of creation. And the number 10 can represent a complete community. So, what's 7 times 10? 70, a symbolic number for the complete, divinely ordered community of all humankind.
And this isn't just a one-off thing. This pattern echoes all through the biblical story. It's 70 members of Jacob's family who go down to Egypt. Israel's main governing council was made up of 70 elders. And in the New Testament, Jesus sends out 70 disciples to reach the nations. The number just keeps popping up to represent the whole of the world's peoples or the leadership that represents them.
So let's pull all these threads together. This chapter isn't just a catalog of names. It's a masterful piece of literary setup, and it perfectly positions us for the really dramatic events that are about to happen next. See, tucked away in Shem's lineage is a man named Eber, and this interpretation suggests that it's from his name that we get the word Hebrew. And get this, it means to cross over. It's like this little prophetic hint about his descendants who would one day be called to cross a river and leave the world of Nimrod behind them. But it gets even more specific. Eber has a son, and he names him Peleg, and the text tells us exactly why. Peleg means division, because it was in his time that the world was divided. I mean, this is a direct, unmistakable foreshadowing of the very next story in Genesis, the Tower of Babel, where humanity's single language gets shattered into many. So when you put it all together, you see Genesis 10 is doing three crucial things all at once. First, it maps the world, giving every nation a place in this one big family. Second, it introduces this massive conflict through Nimrod's rebellion. And third, it plants all these clues that this unified world is on the verge of being divided, setting the stage perfectly for what's to come. And ultimately, this ancient map of nations forces us to ask a bigger question, doesn't it? It presents a world where every nation shares a common origin, but is right on the brink of division. There are competing paths ahead, one of rebellion and one of faithfulness. It leaves you wondering, how do the stories we tell about where we come from end up shaping where we're all going?
Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a part of the Bible that, let's be honest, almost everyone skips. Genesis chapter 10.
The Table of Nations.
Right. And you can see why people skip it. I mean, on the surface, it just looks like this dry, endless list of names and genealogies.
And that appearance is, well, it's profoundly deceiving. This isn't just ancient record keeping. It's more like the foundational blueprint for everything that follows.
Everything.
I mean, if you really want to understand the history, the geography, the ethnic origins, and even the future conflicts detailed in the entire biblical narrative, this chapter is the key. It sets the whole stage for the post-Great Flood world.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to go through this list of descendants, all tracing back to Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, who repopulated the earth. But we aren't just reading the list. We're digging in to extract the symbolic and historical nuggets for you, especially if you're coming to this material fresh and, wondering why on earth a genealogy matters.
Well, it matters because this list essentially lays out a 70-nation world map. It identifies the founders of the major civilizations that would later interact, sometimes violently, with the central characters of the story.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're going to see how this list connects to ancient empires like Babylonia and Assyria, find out the surprising origin of the word Hebrew, and even uncover a key symbolic number 70 that pops up again and again.
It really does.
This is less a list and more an ancient prophecy packaged as a family tree.
A very good way to put it.
So let's start with the structure itself. The text makes it clear. All humanity starts here, post-flood, descending from Noah's three sons.
Right.
And it says these descendants were dispersed across various lands, and crucially, each group was identified by their own language, their clan, their territory, and their national identity. This is like the first attempt to organize the world's population.
And the organization is very clear, though, a bit unbalanced in the numbers. Let's start with Japheth. He gives rise to 14 nations. His sons included Gomer, Magog, Madai, Gion, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. These groups are generally associated with the northern and western peoples. You can think of them as the ancestors of what we might broadly call Proto-Indo-European cultures.
So if we're looking at an ancient map, Japheth's descendants are kind of spreading out toward the fringes, the outer edges of the known world at the time.
Precisely. And the text even singles out the descendants of his son Javan. That's Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim.
And why them specifically?
The source material labels these groups the peoples of the coastlands. They establish their identity not through farming or land armies, but through seafaring and dispersal. They're the mariner peoples, often associated with the Aegean, what we'd connect to Greek and Mediterranean cultures today. Their nature is expansive.
Which brings us to Ham's lineage. And this one is the most expansive line by sheer numbers, 30 nations in total. And it's also geographically the most volatile for the rest of the narrative.
Absolutely. Ham's sons were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan.
And these names give us geographical clues.
Big ones. Mizraim is the root word for Egypt in many ancient languages, so that's a clear marker. Cush is widely associated with territory south of Egypt. like modern Sudan and Ethiopia. Put is usually linked to regions in North Africa.
So Ham's descendants essentially colonized the whole of Africa and the Levant.
Yes, and the line of Canaan is crucial. It's so important because it sets up the location for so many future conflicts.
Also,
Well, Canaan's descendants settled in a territory that went from Sidon in the north all the way south through the Gaza area and then east toward those infamous cities, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim.
and that's the land that will later be promised to the descendants of Shem.
Exactly. The source also notes that Mizraim was the ancestor of several groups, including the Philistines, who become, persistent adversaries later in the story.
Then we get to Shem's lineage, which accounts for 26 nations. Shem is specifically mentioned as the brother of Japheth the Elder, which some commentators see as a way of deliberately elevating his status.
And for good reason. This is the central, you could say the spiritual or religious lineage. These groups occupy the core territories of the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent.
Okay.
Shem's sons included Elam, which is near ancient Persia, Ashur, the ancestor of Assyria, a name you really have to remember, Arphaxad, Lid, and Aram. And Arphaxad is the key here,
Why him?
because he leads directly to Eber, the figure who gives his name to the Hebrews. This is the family line the main biblical narrative is going to follow from here on out.
Okay, the lists are necessary for the geography, but here's where the narrative of, order versus chaos really kicks in, because within Ham's expansive lineage, one individual just leaps off the page.
Nimrod.
Nimrod. He's a descendant of Ham through Cush, and he does not play by the rules.
No, he doesn't. He's given this powerful, almost mythical billing in the text. He's called the first heroic warrior of the earth and the best hunter of the world.
So this was a huge compliment.
Oh, it was more than that. His prowess became proverbial. To say someone was like Nimrod meant they were completely unmatched in skill and strength.
But the narrative pivots pretty quickly from great hunter to something much, much darker.
It does. According to tradition and later commentary, Nimrod isn't just skilled. He's seen as the legendary rebel against God, the first tyrant dictator. He represents the concentration of human power against the divine.
And his actions immediately go against the command given to Noah's family, which was to fill the entire earth, to disperse and spread out.
Nimrod does the exact opposite. He consolidates power. He builds these massive centralizing cities where people have to congregate.
He starts in Babylonia, founding Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, but he doesn't stop there. The text says he then went out into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin.
And what's fascinating here is the stark historical irony. I mean, it's just unavoidable.
What's that?
Nimrod is establishing his power base in the lands of Babylonia and Assyria. These very empires, founded by this original rebel figure, later became the primary oppressors and conquerors of the Kingdom of Israel.
So the conflict that starts with Nimrod versus the divine command establishes the geopolitical antagonism that lasts for centuries.
It sets up the whole structure of opposition. Some Jewish commentary even sees this foundational Nimrod the tyrant versus Abraham the faithful narrative as the origin of the conflict that leads to the final showdown, anticipating the figure of the Antichrist in later traditions.
The rebel versus the lineage of salvation.
Exactly. And that contrast brings us back to the numbers. We have to talk about the profound symbolic significance of the total count of nations here.
The sources are pretty clear. The math here is deliberate, right?
Well, it's very intentional.
Yeah.
If you total the lineages, you've got 14 from Japheth, 30 from Ham, and 26 from Shem. You arrive at the precise number 70.
70.
70. And here is a subtle but crucial point.
Mm-hmm.
You only get to 70 by specifically excluding Nimrod, the great rebel. He is the outlier, the one who stands apart from the organized, complete, and orderly grouping of nations.
So why 70? What makes that number so sacred or important that they'd structure the entire world population around it?
Symbolically, it's a powerhouse. You've got the number 7, which signifies completion or creation, multiplied by 10, which often represents totality or the minimum required for a functional community. So 70 symbolizes the entire world population, organized and complete in all its diversity.
And what stands out to me is how consistently this number appears later on. It's almost inescapable.
It really is. It links the beginning to the rest of the story. Think about Jacob's family, the one who's renamed Israel. When they migrate to Egypt, the text explicitly says that 70 descendants of Jacob went down.
70. There it is again.
That number 70 represents the initial group that carries the lineage of promise into the world.
And that idea of representing the world even permeates their governance. The Sanhedrin, Israel's highest governing council, it had 70 members.
And they chose 70 precisely because it mirrored the 70 nations of the world. The council's role wasn't just self-governance. It symbolically reinforced Israel's mission to be a light to the nations.
Even their worship practices reflected this. During the Feast of Tabernacles, sacrifices were offered in the Jerusalem temple, specifically for the sins of the 70 nations.
It's an act of profound international intercession. And if we connect this to the ultimate expression of mercy, we see the number again. When Yeshua, or Jesus, commanded his followers about forgiveness, he used the phrase 70 times 7.
Linking the whole world population to a demand for infinite forgiveness.
A statement of divine mercy aimed at all the world's chaos. And then, when the mission shifts to the world, the number appears again. Yeshua sends out his missionaries.
70 of them. Or 72 in some translations.
Right. The action mirrored the scope of Israel's original mission. Universal outreach to the world, represented by the 70 nations.
There's even one more with the Septuagint translation.
That's right. The translation of the Old Testament into Greek, the Septuagint, which means 70, was traditionally done by 72 scholars, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. The number itself just acts as this permanent symbolic representative for the totality of humanity.
It's astonishing. So this genealogical list establishes not just who lives where, but the scope and scale of the whole divine mission.
It does. Now let's turn to the fragmentation of that world. The text mentions that the descendants were identified by clan, territory, and language or dialect. This brings up an immediate question of chronology.
That's right, because the famous supernatural division of languages, the Tower of Babel incident, that's detailed in the very next chapter, Genesis 11.
It seems out of order.
It seems odd that chapter 10 mentions the language division before the event that supposedly caused it.
Well, this raises a question about how ancient texts prioritize themes over strict chronology. But some commentators offer an alternative view. The Hebrew word used here in chapter 10 might not refer to a sudden supernatural separation of totally distinct languages,
but to something else.
It might refer to the natural process of evolving familial dialects. As families disperse, their way of speaking naturally drifts until they become, mutually unintelligible over time.
That makes perfect sense. So you have both a natural and a supernatural mechanism for world fragmentation. Let's focus on the lineage that carries the promise forward, specifically Shem's descendant, Ever. This name gives us the origin for the people who become central to the entire narrative.
Exactly. Jewish commentary suggests that the name Ibri, which is the root of Hebrew, derives directly from this figure, Ever. And the name Ever itself has a very pointed meaning, to pass or cross.
And that meaning is applied directly to that pivotal moment in Abraham's story later on, isn't it?
It is. It refers to Abraham's action of crossing the Euphrates River from Mesopotamian Nimrod's kingdom, a land of idolatry, to go toward the Promised Land. So the Hebrew people are defined not just by genetics, but by their action of crossing from one way of life to another.
And speaking of division, Ever had a son whose name literally means division, Peleg.
Right, and the text is explicit. It says his name was Peleg because during his life, the inhabitants of the world were divided into different groups according to their language.
Now, this is where the commentary gets really interesting. Some scholars see Peleg's name as referring to more than just languages, correct?
They do. Over time, in response to skeptics, people wondering how humanity and animals could disperse so widely, some commentators interpreted Peleg's division as a reference to the physical separation of continents after the flood.
Wow.
The theory suggests that before Peleg, the world was a single, vast landmass.
So the idea of continental drift is being retroactively read into the text as an answer to how, say, a kangaroo ended up in Australia after the Ark landed in the Middle East.
It's an ingenious, if debated, solution to a geographical puzzle. But it really underscores the level of detail and explanatory power people found in this seemingly simple list.
So what does this all mean for us? We started with what looked like a boring list of 70 names, and we ended up with the foundational framework for ancient world history, geography, and the entire structure of the story that unfolds. Genesis 10 establishes the origin of humanity, it defines the initial territories, and it introduces the two opposing forces that will drive the whole narrative.
And that opposition is the key insight. On one side, you have the world-conquering tyrants, represented by Nimrod and his desire to consolidate power in vast, oppressive empires.
And on the other?
On the other, you have the lineage of promise, originating with Shem and Eber, defined by that act of crossing away from worldly power and dedicated to the concept of universal mercy.
It really is the blueprint for everything that follows.
The history we just explored is presented as the beginning of a story about a specific family line that's meant to save the world from suffering and injustice. So here's a final thought. If the 70 nations represent the world's inherent chaos and division, and the mission of Israel and its descendants is to overcome that rebel mentality of Nimrod, how then should we view the continuing conflict between centralized, oppressive power and a mission based on boundless forgiveness and mercy, that 70 times 7 command? That is the profound structural heritage established right here in Genesis 10, and something for you to mull or explore on your own.